Hey everyone. Today on NEDA Connections, our guest is Paula Edwards-Gayfield. Paula is a Regional Assistant Vice President at the Renfrew Center, overseeing clinical and administration operations in many of their locations throughout the nation. Paula also serves as a co-chair for Renfrew Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. Hi, Paula. Thank you so much for being a guest on NEDA Connections.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you.
So today, my apologies, I'm having a little, one second. Today we are having a behind-the-scenes look at Renfrew's webinar, Being Different Makes a Difference, Eating Disorders Among Diverse Populations. So let's get started, Paula. Can you tell us why it was so important to you and the Renfrew Treatment Center to create Being Different Makes a Difference, Eating Disorders Among Diverse Populations webinar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think many ways that it's important is, how much as an organization, can we continue to provide like education, support, and awareness. I think that, I know Renfrew has been committed to increasing awareness of like diverse population, diverse clients, and just diversity in general, whether it's race, gender, orientation, including size and even like ableism. But I would say that it's important to make sure that individuals are aware of those unique clinical presentations that may occur within any, different groups. And so, and as well as based on various identities is what I would say really has been important to that. Um, this may sort of lean into maybe another question that you have potentially, I don't know, but I also think one of the reasons that it's important is, we know that eating disorders are, well, at least we conceptualize eating disorders to be disorders of like disconnection and emotional disorders. And we know that emotions are really important in relationships. And so when I think about the therapeutic relationship, then how is it important that then about a diverse individual's culture, And so if we're taking it from sort of that grassroots, if you will, sort of place, if we're looking at relationships and how healing occurs much more powerfully in relationships or much more effectively when there is sort of a mutual sense of empathy, my hope is that this presentation like lends itself to some of that. And I think in relationships, as you begin to understand me as like a person of color, then that would happen and be, again, a strengthening of that cultural connection or the cultural awareness amongst providers. I also think that just in general, with the being different makes a difference. If we're constantly considering cultures, our cultures have a lot of influence on how we experience like eating disorders, but also how we experience mental health in general. And so this presentation, again, is giving a glimpse into some of that.
Great. And so that leads me to my next question. What do you think are the main barriers to access to diagnosis and treatment for people of color and marginalized communities, and how can we make a change?
Hmm. Yeah. Barriers, I think, the potential for not just provider, but just implicit biases that we all like possess. Also, I think just sort of stereotypes in terms of what we may believe about different populations and how they perceive mental health concerns or treatment. I think other barriers might be even just the reluctance to seek care and treatment. Um, I believe that ways that we can make some changes would be just again what you're doing right now, honestly, the increased opportunities for awareness, education. I would even say for providers being willing and open to asking some of the difficult questions is what we really believe is going to be super important. I know NEDA publishes studies, and I'm sure people have read other studies, but when you're looking at some of the provider barriers, or excuse me, provider biases, do providers miss the opportunity to ask questions of people of color about eating disorders? Or do they sort of perceive it to be something else? I know we talked about, there have been studies that reflected the presentation. I think this is actually in the presentation, the webinar, where being able to present a case study, the exact same individual, and all they did was change the race. And looking at the percentage of the times that the white individual was diagnosed with an eating disorder compared to the Latinx individual who was diagnosed with an eating disorder compared to the Black individual that was diagnosed with an eating disorder. And so that's where we really, I'm going to say, check ourselves as providers. Are we walking into some of these situations with our biases?
And do people of color suffer from eating disorders at about the same rates as their white counterparts?
Absolutely. I think that definitely there are definitely some of those situations where there are similar rates of eating disorders in all populations, or people of color, absolutely. But I think that what happens is research may sometimes reflect on, maybe there is the percentage of the diagnoses of like bulimia may be more prevalent in, maybe a certain population. However, what I would say is yes, absolutely. Always, I would say, no matter what, though, in terms of the presentation of eating disorder, is who's coming to treatment. How are we getting the numbers that are reflecting who has an eating disorder? But I would absolutely state that there is some rates are similar to white counterparts. Yeah. I know that was a little bit of a long way to answer your question. I apologize.
No,
Just
that
kind of
was
want to make
great.
sure I'm answering the question a little bit more. But I think that sometimes we get sort of pigeonholed a little bit in terms of what we're looking at when we're diagnosing. But in terms of like, are we looking at rates for anorexia versus bulimia versus binge eating? But I would say as a total, yes, the rates are similar in terms of diagnosing for an eating disorder.
And on that, clearly there's been a lot of criticism regarding there are not enough research studies that are more inclusive. And so, I guess two-part question: why do you think this is? I mean, I think I know. And why is it so important for there to be more inclusivity with regards to funding and research for eating disorders?
Yeah, I think kind of the first part of your question goes a little bit to provider bias. Like, are we missing the opportunity to diagnose? But then also, even again, kind of reflecting back to the other question, is there also a bit of a reluctance to seek treatment too? And so, because in many ways, there is still the stigma or stereotypes that eating disorders are a white adolescent, young adult, middle class America sort of disease or disorder. And I think that absolutely sort of becomes part of it. I think that in people of color, like, there's no way I can have an eating disorder. I just like food, or I'm a picky eater, whatever that may be, that sort of accompanies the rationale. And then the second part, I think that yes, it would be phenomenal to have more representation in studies and research. And I think part of that is just going to be just going out and seeking it, identifying where may you have a population, whether that's like historically Black colleges and universities are a great way to capture, a population, or sororities might be a great way to capture populations, but also really being purposeful in terms of seeking out how and where do you educate people, do you, share this information that hopefully would make it easier or increase, I guess I would say, individuals' willingness to participate in a study.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. I don't necessarily say that would make it easier, but maybe if we're presenting opportunities and we're constantly saying this happens, then maybe someone would be able to say, okay, yeah, it really does happen, and that's what's happening with me.
Absolutely. Great answer, Paula. Thank you. And lastly, is there anything you'd like to share about the webinar that I haven't asked you about?
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
I did.
um,
I thought it was fascinating,
oh,
very
thank you.
informative. I loved it.
Thank you. I would just say just have an open mind, and I think that it's not even just about the webinar in and of itself, but hopefully just what the webinar reflects, like when you're working with diverse populations or having a maybe being open to working with diverse populations if you haven't. So I would just say having that open mind, and that's the thing that I would just encourage people to think about. And if you have questions, definitely send them towards NEDA. And, if there are things that I can answer or we can answer, we would be happy to do that.
Well, this has been really wonderful. The webinar, I encourage everybody to watch it. It's absolutely interesting and fascinating and information that you would not be able to find elsewhere easily. So I encourage everybody to watch it. But thank you so much for joining us today, Paula. This has been extremely wonderful, NEDA Connections. So thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Jennifer. Thank you, NEDA. Bye.